Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of housekeeping matters. If you have a question card that you want answered in your possession, just hold it up and one of our very astute, whenever you're ready, one of our very astute KRLA staffers will come along and pick it up and hand it up to me. And we also have an introductory video that we want to show you, and we will do that right now. Are we ready with that, Richard? Great.
Kids are not like cars.
Would not put the children on assembly lines, make them all blue or green.
Well, the greatest resistance comes from those who are guardians of the status quo, who still guard the status quo long after the status quo has lost its status.
We've got to get real. The public knows, and they're not happy, and they're not buying it anymore.
Just a couple of weeks ago, we had the story of the young lady who graduated from Denby High School about 4 years ago and couldn't even read her diploma.
If this was a school system where if they were all had on Klan robes at the school board, and they did this to our children, we would be marching and screaming.
That's what the MEA wants, is the money. That's what controls everything. Money moves the world.
Salary steps, longevity pay, sick bank cash out.
And you had hundreds of people sucking money off the district and providing no value. Stunning.
It's not a factory, and we are not stamping out widgets.
At some point, it's time for the adults to grow up, because it's about, is it about the children or is it about them?
They are young human beings.
Dick, a question, something that I often have started to argue on my show is that, we've been yelling a long time about poor education, poor quality, poor results in public schools, and you would think that there would be enough incentive, that our children's future would be enough incentive to improve public education. I came to the conclusion that apparently that wasn't enough. So I started arguing that it's also an economic issue when we look at the LAUSD, for example. How are we going to bring jobs and keep companies in a city like Los Angeles when we don't have a school district that company's employees and employers are comfortable putting their kids in? Would you talk about the effect and the impact on our country, particularly an economic impact, that school choice could have?
Well, we are in a global economy, obviously. And in that economy, the United States' role is to be at the intellectual top of that. We're supposed to be the world's lawyers and accountants and managers and inventors and bankers and ad agency people, and we're supposed to be the providers of those services. We are not supposed to be the world's manufacturers. It's ridiculous to hear the politicians talk about saving manufacturing jobs. First of all, in 5 or 6 years, 10 years, there'll be 1% of the labor force in manufacturing, and they'll produce half of the world's manufactured goods. We're saving jobs for robots, not for workers. When I worked for President Clinton, 18% of the labor force was involved in manufacturing. Now 9% is. And we produce 50% more products now than we did then. The illusion that the United States is losing its lead in manufacturing is a total illusion. The United States produces 25% of the world's manufactured goods. It's in first place. China used to produce about 4 or 5%. Now it's up to 15 or 16, and it'll probably begin to close in on the United States in the next 2 or 3 years. But the U.S. share has remained constant at 25%. It's just that you don't employ anybody anymore. It's machines that have taken the place. And if Obama gets his way and he taxes energy through cap and trade, they're going to move offshore because you're replacing people with energy. And if you tax the energy, they'll just move the factories out of the United States entirely. But it is very, very clear that education is the key component here. I remember once I was in the White House and Clinton came in for a meeting, and he was kind of euphoric. He was almost giggly and high, and I said, "Why are you so happy?" And he said, "I just got a briefing that this month, for the first time in American history, educational level is a more accurate predictor of earning capacity than race or gender is." And that obviously is the future. And if we have these leaden public schools that are not really turning out people of any quality, not the kids' fault, but the education establishments, it's going to be terrible. This is a cancer that is affecting the most vital organ we have, which is our schools and our children and our future. And we're running it for the benefit, supposedly, of the providers of the service. Now, teachers are not being helped by the teachers' union because the most fundamental reform that's needed is merit pay. There is no reason why a good teacher should not earn $100,000 a year. What you all do as teachers is more important than what any of the rest of us do. And it's more important that you be well paid for that, and that you be paid based on your ability, and you be rewarded based on the outcomes. Test the kids in September, test them in June, and pay teachers based on the difference, not based on seniority. Let there be creativity, let there be change and experimentation, and all of the things that ultimately produce good outcomes. Instead, the teachers' union is dedicated to the preservation of mediocrity at best, and at worst, less than mediocrity. There are 80,000 school teachers in New York City's public schools. 2 have been fired for incompetence in the last decade. 2. There are almost 1,000 teachers, about 150 assistant principals, who show up every day to the Board of Education headquarters in what are called rubber rooms, where they read the paper all day, and they get full pay and full benefits. Why? Because the chancellor has decided that they are too abusive, too crazy, too incompetent, too senile, too whatever, to risk exposing them to children. But he can't fire them. And New York City spends $40 million a year doing that. We have created a system here where the schools are run for the benefit of the worst teachers and of the union institution. You saw that thing about Michigan, and you heard what Hugh was saying about the teachers' union. The teachers' union in Michigan controls health insurance, and the Michigan school system pays 30% more for health insurance than private insurance companies do, and the union pockets the profit. The union controls school custodians and pupil transportation, and about 40% of the dollar on education is spent outside of the classroom, most of it to the benefit of the Michigan Education Association. That kind of paradigm has got to come to a halt, and it is directly related to our ability to provide jobs and compete in the future.
Hugh, one of the, when someone's playing devil's advocate on this debate about school choice, one of the criticisms that seems to come up is the potential that public schools will be hurt, in essence lose funding, if students can select which school they want to attend. They won't have the pupils in the seats, so they won't get the kind of funding. What is the response to that concern that seems to rear its head in the debate?
I think, Kevin, it is raised by the union that choice will penalize some schools, but it's an argument we don't even have to wage anymore. I believe that people see through it. I believe that that argument's over. The only argument that exists anymore, they don't care what happens to bad teachers, they don't care what happens to bad schools. How do we get from where we are to where we need to go? How do we do that? You know, I look at Don Wagner, our assemblyman, and say, you know, you got to get up there and you got to change things. And where the chips fall, be damned. I'll tell you how it's going to happen. Tom Corbett, the new governor of Pennsylvania, elected, and he's not that great of a candidate. I mean, he really is kind of old school attorney general. PA bill number 1.
Watch it, Hugh, he's a client.
Is he a client? No, but he won going away.
One of the
Maybe
30
you're giving
governors
him
or
the-
senators, yeah.
You may have given him the advice that he followed today. He introduced PA1, school choice. First bill in Pennsylvania by a governor in a swing state is a school choice bill. So I think what Dick said, Chris Christie, in fact, if I can grab a question for Dick from you, Kevin. Chris Christie did an Alinsky thing. He focused on an individual group. He made them a target. He elevated their profile, and he said, let's have that debate. And he kicked their rear ends. Was that intentional, do you think?
Yeah, I think it was. In Florida, Governor Scott, the newly elected Republican governor, has introduced legislation which will pass that any Florida parent may apply to the state and get a voucher equal to 85% of the state share of per pupil expenditure, and can give it in any school they want. In Arizona, almost 30% of the students are now in non-traditional public schools. In Indiana, Governor Mitch Daniels, who's one of those looking at running for president, has pioneered this incredible agenda of school choice throughout the state. But here's what's going to happen. The states are going to come to Washington begging for more money. And because states in the United States collectively spend $3 trillion a year, and they get only $2 trillion a year in tax revenues. The extra trillion comes from Washington. About half of that extra trillion is formulaic. It's Medicaid and welfare and stuff like that, and they're entitled to it without congressional action. Half of it has to be voted each year by Congress. And this year, the Republican House of Representatives is going to say no. And when they say no, bonding agencies are going to stop lending states money because they know that they're not sound enough fiscally to pay them back. And particularly California, New Jersey, Illinois, and New York. Those 4 states have a worse credit rating, that is to say a higher insurance premium on their debt than Greece and Portugal do. And what's going to happen is that those states will not be able to borrow money, which means they will not be able to keep their government open and alive. And they'll come back to the Congress and say, we're going to have to close the schools and open the prisons unless you give us money. And then here's what's going to happen. The House of Representatives Republicans are going to pass a bill amending Chapter 9 of the federal bankruptcy law, permitting states to go bankrupt, and in the bankruptcy courts to reorganize and abrogate their collective bargaining agreements. Goodbye NEA, goodbye AFT, goodbye SEIU, goodbye AFSCME. Margaret Thatcher said it best. She said the problem with socialism is at some point you run out of other people's money. And that's exactly what's happening in the schools today. And then politicians like Governor Brown are going to face a choice. I've got to cut my budget like crazy, or I go through this bankruptcy procedure. And they'll probably have to choose the bankruptcy. And then they'll go through another issue. Do I continue to spend $10,000 a student in the Los Angeles public school system? Or do I pay $8,300 a student in charter, private, and parochial schools that provide better education? $10,000, $8,300, guess what's going to win? And as a result, fiscal necessity will accomplish what all of the argumentation in the world has made impossible to accomplish. Because as powerful as that union is, it can't create money.
Can't print money, no.
Dick, while you're there, you mentioned the unions. A moment ago, you gave us a prediction of sorts. You said 1 year from now, these teacher unions are not going to be as powerful. Is there a trigger date? Is there something that sparks that in your mind?
What's going to happen is the state's fiscal year ends June 30th. And long about March or April, they're going to run out of money. And the process of going to Washington like addicts for the methadone clinic for that morning's fix is going to happen. And the clinic will be closed. The House will say no. And the bankruptcy legislation that I'm talking about will pass sometime around March or April and will be the Republican response to the state's request. Now, Obama will veto it. The Democrats in the Senate won't pass it. The governors in the Democratic states will raise hell about it. Christie in New Jersey will be happy about it. But the Republicans in the House aren't budging. They're simply saying, I'm not going to make the other 46 states come to your rescue. I'll give you the tools to solve your own problem and to reorganize yourselves. And you make the decisions. We're not going to tell you what to do, but you decide how you're going to adjust to that. And when that happens, many states are going to have to go through this bankruptcy process. You're going to see tremendous changes in the relationship between the unions and the school administrators. You're going to see a dramatic statewide move toward choice. And I predict that 2 or 3 years from now, the education system will no longer be monopolistic. We'll be quite open, choice will be the norm, and the public schools will start to come back because they will be freed of this stultifying control. Teachers will be able to be creative and be rewarded properly for their creativity. And teaching will again become a tremendously attractive career because of merit pay. That if you do well, you can make a really good living being a teacher. So I think all of this is going to happen, and you have a perfect storm. 11 new Republican governors, 19 new Republican state legislative chambers. We used to have Democratic majorities, now Republican out of the 99 in the country. Nebraska's unicameral. And the fiscal problems that are hitting the states, and the cutoff of the spigot in Washington, and the availability of choices and alternative. All of that is going to come together in a perfect storm that is going to change public education. So if you have children in public school, bless you, you came along at just the right time, because they're going to change.
And I do want to apologize to our panelists, Dick and to Hugh and to the audience members. When I asked him that question, I did accidentally use the word trigger. And in this era of civility, I need to work on that. I do recognize that. Right. Yeah, catalyze. Here, there we go. That said, Hugh, this issue has made it to the big screen, which in a lot of ways means it's made it to parts of our population that need to see it. Hollywood, well, Hollywood-ish, Hollywood adjacent. We had 2 movies, documentaries, Waiting for Superman and The Cartel. And talk about the impact that you see those movies having in the way that they handle the issue of unions.
Well, Cartel is still rolling out, so let me talk a little bit about Waiting for Superman. Waiting for Superman, directed by Davis Guggenheim, Academy Award-winning director of Al Gore's documentary as well. And I interviewed Davis at length, and it's a magnificent, wonderful, moving film that hits you where you live, because it hits you with the plight of kids who are desperate to get out of their circumstance, and of parents who love their children so much that they will do anything to get to the lottery. It's the lottery is the defining metaphor, and we shouldn't be playing dice with children. That's why it is a powerful, powerful movie. And Davis Guggenheim was moved by guilt to do it because of the Los Angeles schools that Kevin referred to. He would drive by 3 of them on the way to his children's private school in Los Angeles. And he thought to I'm a liberal, I'm a leftist. How can I do this? Jonathan Alter is a friend of mine. He's on my show a lot, a pretty good biographer of FDR, not so much in agreement with him on his Obama biography, but he rails about the public schools. And I mean, you can't get much more to the left and be in the mainstream media than Jonathan. And it's because everybody knows how terrible this is. I want to pick up on one thing that Dick mentioned, and he's using his language very closely. Another I know all these political consultants, Frank Luntz. Frank says words at work, words at work, words at work. Frank is always worried about language, as all of these guys are, because they know it's a phrase. We are not against the teachers. Right? We are not. There's an unseen crowd here. If we had enough time, I could get you to name with about 90% accuracy all of your teachers. All of them. From grade kindergarten, from me, Mrs. Fitting, through your high school algebra, chemistry, whatever, you could remember them. And you'd remember, you'd rank them.
Sister, right?
Yeah, that's his sister, Aloysius. You bet. And you did not want to mess with her. No. She's still teaching. She's 72 years old. She's in North Carolina. She's still teaching. She's a magnificent educator. Ron Karenbauer, Latin. I know them all. Kathy Santucci, Frank Hoover, Fred Hoover. I can name them all.
I went to a public high school in Manhattan, and my English teacher was Frank McCourt. Angela's ashes. He taught public high school in New York.
Was he good?
Oh, he was wonderful.
What did you read?
Wonderful. What?
Did they make you read Silas Marner? That's a terrible thing they do to you.
No, they made me read Ivanhoe.
Ivanhoe, that's worse. But take my test. How many of your primary school teachers can you name?
I can remember them all, every single one.
You see, we're not anti-teacher. And that language is so important.
Isn't it funny? I don't know their first names. It's Mr. and Mrs. And, you know. In fact, my second and first grade teacher just recently died. And when I was first meeting with President Clinton in the White House, I was in the Oval waiting for him, and there was this pad that said White House. So I scribbled a note to her.
To your first
and second grade teacher.
You see, that is Sister Mary. It's.
I just said thank you. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you.
And that's the language we have to use. We have to embrace the profession and the aspiration of every young teacher who goes into the classroom and say to them, we know you're on our side. We are against the unions. By the way, I haven't done any polling on this. I think the average classroom teacher is in favor of liberation. They're like the Eastern Europeans living under the status of let us go.
Well, you took that was my next question, Hugh, to you in connection with how many teachers support the unions. You want to put a percentage on it? Dick?
Well, again, it depends on the union. Let's remember that the unions were formed at a time when teachers were abysmally paid. The legacy of the Great Depression was that you were lucky you had a job, and teachers were the luckiest of all because they were really the only ones that were regularly paid. And the idea was that they would be paid very little, get a lot of vacation time, and a lot of job security. And because it was at that time traditionally or almost exclusively a female profession, nobody thought in terms of single women back then, so it was kind of a second income and, you know, a nice thing to do. Shanker really changed that when he set up the teachers' union. And because of their political clout, there was a tremendous increase in funding of education. Then what happened? That was kind of the 70s and the 80s. Then in the 80s, beginning in Arkansas with Governor Clinton and Hillary, it was the last time I liked her. There was a strong effort for education standards. Governor Bush in Texas, Governor Hunt in North Carolina, Governor Riley in South Carolina, and all of a sudden the whole focus was testing and competence and measurement and accountability and adequate funding. And that persisted for 20 years, and it didn't do any good. All that it did was document the fact that it wasn't making any progress. So now everybody sort of realizes that, and we're coming full circle to school choice. And that goes against the union as an institution that's incredibly wealthy. Randy Weingarten, the head of the New York Federation of Teachers, the United Federation of Teachers, the AFT affiliate in New York City, just left the New York UFT to become head of the national AFT with a $600,000 bonus. It's stuff like that that drives teachers crazy. And I think that if they could be assured that there is a way that their jobs would not be endangered and we would not go back to the era of low education funding, I think they would gladly replace the teachers' union.
I want to add to that. I believe in tenure, but I believe in a tenure that does not keep everyone there. I believe in a tenure that is open to ending the dance of the lemons. Jill Stewart framed that in the LA Weekly 20 years ago. She's a lefty reporter, but she came up with the habit of the Los Angeles Unified School District taking the worst principals and worst teachers. They know who they are, and moving them, which does two things. It perpetuates failure, it penalizes students, right? That's number one. Number two, it keeps good teachers from coming in, right? You seal up. No profession can afford to say everybody stays. If they simply had tenure with the exception, but we get to dump 5% a year, all right? We're going to keep 95% of all teachers every year. The problem would be over. So it's tenure with an exception.
But the answer here is not for us to promulgate changes. The answer is to let schools promulgate changes and let the marketplace reward those that do it well and punish those who do it poorly. If a school is protecting good teachers through its tenure, parents will vote with their feet to go to that school, and the school will make money because they're being paid a capitation fee for each student that goes there.
But here's the practical issue. Over in Arizona, for example, greatheartsaz.com, charter schools, about a dozen of them in the first tranche of them, wonderful set of schools. Look it up, Great Hearts, Arizona. They have to compete to get teachers to come to them at the beginning. They don't offer much in the way of tenure, but they offer some. And so if you're going to have charter schools compete at the beginning, they even compete without retirement benefits of the sort that traditional public schools have. Great teachers want to teach in great schools, but you've got to give them some transitional benefits in the way of some sort of modified tenure system. So I'm not a radical. I think we can get there with even 50% of competition. It will all fall apart. It's the most like the Soviet Empire of anything in America. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn said in his wonderful memoir, The Calf and the Oak, what if it's all paper mache? What if you can poke a stick through it? And he wrote that before the Soviet Union turned out to be paper mache. I believe public education in America, the architecture of it is paper mache.
Kevin,
Yeah, Dick.
I just don't want to go further in this without recognizing in the audience a man of unbelievable courage and integrity. There are very few people where you can really say they sacrificed their political careers to fight for the right. And we have a gentleman here in our audience who meets that description, former Congressman Jim Rogan.
Dick, how did we get to the point that geographic location is the only criteria for determining where kids can go to school?
Well, we got to that point because of the idea of local control of schools, which made sense. And communities would form school boards that would control the schools, and you, of course, would go to school in your community. But, of course, that was before there were things like computers and the internet and virtual schools and all kinds of options that transcend that. It was even before there were cities. And, you know, if you had to go to the school you lived in because the other one was 100 miles away. Now there is not that necessity. And I think we need to crack it open in a fundamental, basic way. But this whole concept of a marketplace-driven education so that parents can decide what they're going to do. And this solution, by the way, is not just in education. It's in that other aspect of our system, healthcare. Governor Daniels of Indiana has initiated a system where he tells state workers, you have a choice. You can keep the current health insurance you have, or I'll give you $2,700 at the start of the year. You spend it on your health care needs. And if there's anything left at the end of the year, you keep it. And if you pay another $1,000 above it, you pay for it yourself. Another $1,000 above that, we'll pay half of it. Another $1,000 above it, you pay 10%, and above that, we'll pay everything. So if you get really sick, we'll be there for you. Now, 2/3 of the state employees chose the new system, and 3/4 had money left over at the end of the year. So empower the consumer and you will reform healthcare. Empower the parents and you will reform education.
I want to add, though, at this point, I also want to take on, Dick and I want to make sure we get to the biggest objections, and I'm just going to leapfrog over one of them. I'm sure it's on your list, Kevin, which is, what about inner city schools which are overwhelmingly populated by second language learners? And it is an issue. It's a local school issue. Here's the deal. If you read Jay Matthews' book, Work Hard, Be Nice, about the Knowledge is Power program, KIPP, it is absolutely undeniable that children from single-parent families with no English spoken in the house can be mainstreamed and can excel if they are put into schools which do the very basic things, which is usually 6-day-a-week learning, usually a 9-hour day, usually an 11-month school focused on math and basic skills. Repetition works. So they took this radical concept, a bunch of Yale liberals, they went into the public schools of Houston, into the toughest schools in Houston. It's since spread all over the country. KIPP is a magnificent, read Matthew's book. It can work. It can absolutely work for single, absolutely no language kids from a single parent family, and we've proven that. So I just want to anticipate the objection. Local schools, even in impoverished areas of high immigration, even in impoverished areas of high illegal immigration, can be made to work with the simple program that I just outlined, and parents will do anything to get their kids into those schools. They know. They know.
Hugh, one of the things you talked about in the last couple of weeks in the promo that ran on the station on KRLA was the academic performance of American students when compared with other students internationally. Where do you assess that blame? Obviously, teachers' unions come up in the blame category. Sometimes you hear about the bureaucracy of administration in the blame category. Where can we begin to improve to work the American students? Like you said, we should not be 35th in anything. Bring us up to the area of competition where we belong.
Well, we gave up on doing difficult things with kids. I am not Mr. Math, right? I mentioned Sister Aloysius. I just don't get geometry, as people know if they listen to my radio show. It's kind of, I'm not
even triangulation?
Not even triangulation. I leave that to you. I kept trying to figure that out. What do they mean by it? Because I never quite got that. But however, you have to drill it in. This is the KIPP deal. You do it all day, every day. You start with your tables, you work through it, you go to summer school, you just drill it in. We stopped doing that. I think it's because there was no reward for doing it. If you were a teacher who would put the hours in, there was no reward. I met with, before the program, with the Excel.com math guy. Alan, where are you, Alan? Alan is a math teacher, a lifetime math teacher. He's got this brilliant idea of putting the best math, of doing eHarmony between teachers and students on the web. All right, does that convey it? eHarmony between teachers. Who teaches you math? Who floats your boat? Because you can't live in this world without math. This new world is a math world. And how did we do that? We gave up teaching these kids because it was unpleasant and hard and nobody likes math. And so I think the reason we're behind is that it got too hard for too little return. I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
Well, the other reason is that parents don't get that the schools are terrible. There was a national poll about a year ago which asked parents to grade their child's school, A, B, C, D, or F. And 40% gave them an A, 50% gave them an A or a B, and only 10% gave them an F. Then they were asked to grade American education in general, and only 20% gave it an A or a B, and 50% gave it an F. Now somebody's wrong, you know? And parents tend to believe that their schools are good. Now we have the test scores that have deflated that notion, and that's laid the antecedent for national choice.
Hugh, I will tell you, my mother was a geometry teacher for about 20 years. If you need some help, I can probably I think she would like you. I think she would like you. One benefit of that is some of the tougher kids in my school didn't make very good grades in math. She was a great tutor, so it helped me with the bullies. There are a couple of terms that we hear a lot that are bounced around, and I think there may be some interesting differences between the two. And Dick, maybe we start with you, because you hear a lot about, and you've mentioned it tonight, you hear a bit about vouchers. And another topic that you hear about in connection with public school education and improving it is tax credits. Now, they seem to be self-explanatory, but could you talk a little bit about the differences?
Well, they're essentially synonyms broadly. There's vouchers, there's tax credits, and there's scholarships. Scholarships is the nicest word. Tax credits are sort of technically correct, and vouchers are frowned upon. In the average public school, about 35% of the cost of education is borne by the locality in property taxes, and about 65% is borne by the state through state aid. Somewhere in there's about 5% that's federal, but most of that goes to the state. So the concept of a voucher or a scholarship or even a tax credit is that you give the parent that 65% that comes from the state. And the parent can then send their child to X school, and X school gets the $6,500. And the school that loses them loses that $6,500. And as I said, in California, in Los Angeles, private and parochial and charter schools are about 20% less expensive than public schools. So that ultimately works out fairly well. Now, some states, like Arizona, have a very interesting alternative to that. They have a law that says you can check off on your income tax, and up to $500 per person, or $1,000 per couple, you can direct your tax money to a special fund. You don't pay more in taxes. You just aim some of the taxes you currently pay to this special fund that is then allocated statewide for scholarships to bring people in to charter schools and other good schools. And there are priorities for foster children and handicapped children, special needs kids, but ultimately it's available to a lot of children. And they've raised $57 million a year for that. And 10% of the students in Arizona receive that financial aid and go to the school that they and their parents wish them to go to. But that concept of you attach the money to the child, and then the child shows up at the door worth $6,500, makes the school want to keep the child, want to educate the child, want to do a good job of it, because that's a check walking around. By the way, this process is not like rocket science. It's how private schools stay alive. It's what President Clinton and President Obama both did with their children. Incidentally, before we get to anything else, I just want to make one other comment. The inner city stuff you were talking about. There's this magnificent woman named Ginny Ford, who is in Washington, D.C., and she is the head of the choice and charter effort in Washington. And she's African American. And I had the opportunity to spend time with her a couple of months ago. And I asked her, why are you so focused on this issue? And she said, I come from Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was one of those children that integrated Central High School in Little Rock in 1957. And there had to be federal troops to escort me into school. And I believe that the modern issue of school integration is school choice.
I am informed that we have a social networking opportunity, and I'm also told, Dick, that you have a number for people to text from their cell phone. All right, so before we get to your question cards, and by the way, what we want you to do is, I know we told you to turn down your cell phones or turn them off. I know you all have cell phones. This is your opportunity to use them. What we would like for you to do is just send a text to the number that Dick is going to provide you, and that will let the public school network, the public choice network know, or school choice network know, that we are all here and ramping up for next week. Dick, do you have the number?
Yeah. So if you're technically illiterate like I am, on the top line of your messaging it says 2, and there write the number 69866. Is that up there somewhere?
Right,
Yeah.
it's up there.
69866.
Thank you, sir.
866. And then on the message part, write the word school space choice. And you will get back an email that reads like this. Thanks for texting in. What is your child's name and grade level? Do you have an email address? If so, reply with your email. And at that point, surrender hope. You will learn all about school choice and the events, the opportunities, the events in the school choice program, and we'll keep you in the loop. It's vitally important that we develop touch with our grassroots constituency here. The Teachers Union has a nice list of its grassroots supporters, and we need one, and that's one of the big reasons we're doing these events around the country, to get 500 or 1,000 people at each one. So please text that number. It's 69866. And the message is school space choice.
And if you would be a force multiplier for us, my friend Cliff Cramp sitting here, he's side ache. He's a Twitterer on the Hugh Hewitt show, Triple-Freed. And Laura, is that Laura next to you? I have to be nice to her because he's been monitoring me. If you use social media, whether it's Facebook or it's Twitter, if you would tweet or post 69866, I want to be very transparent with you. As Dick said, our objective is to build a grassroots network that will lobby instantly for choice. I believe that the Tea Party is very much consistent. I'd love to hear Dick's take on this. I know Kevin's been involved in the Tea Party. Don Wagner and I were at a Tea Party event on health care. It's much more than spending in health care. It's about empowering individuals. And I believe the Tea Party is very ready to put their arms around grassroots education reform as a next phase issue, as it's so consistent with citizenship.
Yeah, the Tea Party is very enthusiastic about school choice, and indeed participated in helping to set up this tour around the country. You know, when you go to Washington, if any of you go there for vacation, and Jim went there for Congress, don't drink the water. Bottled water only. Because there's something in the water supply in Washington that makes you liberal and makes you want to spend a lot of money. Now, you all know when there's impurity in the water, you have to boil it and then throw in a tea bag.
Anyone that has a card that has that you want read, we've got a couple of guys in red shirts that are back there that could help us pick the cards up. Richard, maybe some of the guys, if they're listening or not.
Kevin, while we're getting those, can I ask Dick a question?
Yeah.
While we're collecting those.
We'll call on Hugh first. Thank you, sir.
It's a little off topic. Did you and Hillary ever get into a screaming match?
No, Hillary saved me from Bill. This was May of 1990, and I was in the Arkansas governor's mansion, and it was late at night, it was midnight, and both Bill and I were a little bit testy, and he was sinking in the polls, which usually made him testy, and he turned it around, but he was worried about losing his primary in Arkansas in his re-election for governor. And he started yelling at me and cursing at me and saying, "You're effing me and you're S-ing me and you're not giving me any attention and you're letting me whatever." And I was pretty short on the fuse too, and I started yelling back at him. And at that point I had become a Republican, but I grandfathered him in as a client. So I said, "You have solved my problem, sir. Now I am a 50-state Republican. Go F yourself and lose this election on your own." And I stormed out of the mansion, and I hear hoofbeats behind me. And he grabbed me around the waist and threw me to the ground and bent over me with his fist back. and Hillary grabbed his arm, yelling, "Bill, Bill, Bill, think of what you're doing," and dragged him off, and Bill turned red-faced, sputtering apologies, and I got up and stormed out of the governor's mansion, furious, wanting to go home, to my hotel. And Hillary went outside, put her arm around me, and walked me around the grounds and said, Dick, he didn't mean it. Please, don't hold this against him. He didn't mean it." And then she said a line whose interpretation I will leave to each of you. Quote, "He only does this to people he loves."
With that,
Great time eater when we get the questions, eh?
thank you. Well, okay. With that, Hugh, the first question from the audience. There's, of course, news in Los Angeles this week with school violence. We had shootings in 3 different schools. What effect could school choice have in tamping down school violence?
Well, I'm not going I believe deeply in this issue, but I want to confront the 2 issues that are the biggest objections to them. The first is that dysfunctional kids and dysfunctional families, including those prone to violence, will be left behind because their parents will not care and they are themselves too far gone. And, I'd actually invite Judge Rogan to think about grandstanding on this one, because he lived he was a pretty tough kid in this book, and they don't want to go to school choice. They don't care where they are. So I don't think school choice solves every dysfunction in the inner city, and it's really a breakdown of family. I may even give you the microphone here, Jim, for that answer, but I will say this as well. The other issue is the significantly challenged special needs child that school choice has trouble accommodating, because it's the federal mandates under the Americans with Disability Act are so significant that these are the real 2 difficult issues to get your arms around. So I'll have Dick answer that. And Jim, I'm going to put you on the spot and have you talk about that as well when it comes to those 2 communities.
I hate to sound simplistic, but could somebody please tell me why the hell they can't have metal detectors at the entrances to schools? You don't have a problem with shootings on airplanes.
Judge Rogan, I'm putting you on the spot very quickly.
I wasn't expecting this, obviously, but just in a nutshell, I was the illegitimate son of a cocktail waitress, convicted felon growing up in San Francisco, 4 kids, all of us running wild, running around with guys selling drugs, stealing cars, and everything else. And the only reason I sit as a judge today instead of a defendant is because there were some teachers that were able to reach out, put their arms around us, bang our heads together, and not worry about being sued over it.
That upbringing, of course, well equipped him for service in Congress.
Dick, are national education standards a good idea or not?
Yeah, sure they are. They're essential, and they're an essential component of school choice, because, you don't want matchbook schools on the back of matchbooks, offering education and absorbing money. You need testing, you need national standards, you need national curriculum, national outcome standards, not telling them how to do it, but measuring the outcome and making sure that it's effective. And one of the really great things that Clinton did was to promote this kind of testing, and then Bush passed No Child Left Behind, which for all of its defects and all of its limited funding and all of the defects of testing at least measured it, and at least gave you a handle on whether the school was effective or not, at least in basic terms. So yeah, I think it's absolutely essential to do that. But while we're on the subject, let me address one other thing. The House Republicans today issued a $2.5 trillion cut in government spending over a 10-year period that calls for the virtual, maybe the actual, I don't know yet, elimination of the Department of Education. Now,
there went that question.
In the 1990s, when I worked in the administration, the Department of Education was very important because we were only beginning the concept of national testing. And in this decade, it was very important in setting that system up. But now it has become a $70 billion bureaucracy that we just do not need and we can't afford. So I support that cut, and I think it's very important.
Let me add something about that Department of Education story. Preparing for this tour, and as I'm wont to do, I use Google just to see what's out there. So I type in, what works in public education? And you are taken to a Department of Education website. It is dreadful. It is full of jargon. It cannot be understood. It could not possibly influence it's what the Department of Education does, which is talk to other bureaucrats. I contrast that with two things. A friend of mine may or may not be here tonight, Linda Kleinert. She's an education professional. She's a reading professional. Linda, are you here somewhere? Maybe she didn't get here. And, over there. There she does. She and our innovators in Orange County do reading the old-fashioned way. They encourage these kids to sit down with books and to read. And that is really, education reform, and it's very, very basic. It's one of those obvious examples. We know what works. But if you have any doubt about what works, there's another book out there, bestseller, called Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lamalfa. Doug Lamalfa had this crazy idea that there are good teachers and not so good teachers, and that he would videotape the really great ones, and he would find out what it is that made them great. It's simplicity, directness, repetition, and enthusiasm. It's a great book, Teach Like a Champion. We can make this stuff work. We don't need a Department of Education to study what works. It is known at the local level by educators. They could shutter it tomorrow, and no one would notice.
Next question from the audience. I'm an LAUSD teacher.
By the way, I just did a little bit of math in my head, something that might be beyond you, but...
I'm a lawyer.
The Department of Education absorbs $1,000 for every child, every school child. 55 million school kids, $70 billion budget. Do the math yourself. $1,200 a student. That's 10%. That would be a 10% increase in per pupil expenditure in the United States. I think it's better spent there.
I'm an LAUSD teacher. We were told that merit pay will be in place perhaps next year. Obama is pushing merit pay, but for a different reason, i.e. to reward liberal teachers and discourage conservative ones. Please comment.
I'm unaware of the president advancing any merit pay proposal, and if he did, I would be profoundly suspicious of it, because the test of genuine reform will be to take on publicly and for a sustained period of time teachers' unions, which he has never done, nor will he ever. Did Bill Clinton ever say anything bad about the teachers' unions?
Well, it's a fascinating story. In Arkansas, he made his living. In Arkansas, he made his political career fighting the teachers' union.
Okay.
When Clinton was elected governor in '78, he lost in '80. When he came back in '82, his big promise was competency tests for teachers and fire the ones that failed. And that was suggested to him by Hillary. And he implemented it. And he fired 15% of the teachers in Arkansas. Got rid of them, fired them. And as a result, the teachers' union never endorsed Clinton for governor, always endorsed his opponents in the primary, always made sure he had a primary, and in the general election, they remained neutral. And the teachers' union is the most essential building block of the Democratic Party in most southern states. So that was a big, big deal. Then when Clinton went to Washington, he really was not pro or anti-union. He didn't have much to do with it. And then when Hillary ran for the Senate in New York, she emerges as this rubber stamp for the teachers' union, backing tenure, opposing merit pay, opposing school choice, opposing vouchers, the whole bit. And it was a transformation that left me aghast, because her whole reputation in Arkansas was based on the most courageous opposition to teachers' unions. People ask me why I turned against Hillary. It's because she changed.
If we are successful with school choice reform, Dick, what would you do next to improve our schools?
Well, I think that, obviously you need to monitor it. Obviously you need to see what works. The whole point in school choice is to create a plethora, a variety of opportunities and see what works, experiment, and really use that to find out what's effective and what's not. And obviously there's an important role for government in catalyzing and incentivizing the schools that work, with grants, with aid, with training, with all kinds of stuff, logistical support, and there's a whole range of things. You're really talking about a fundamental change in the whole school system, and that's not simply a matter of signing your name on a bill. You've got to really fundamentally see it through over the next 3 or 4 years. But at the end of that, we will have a totally different school system in this country, which probably will have its own problems and its own difficulties, and we'll have to respond to that. One thing I know about politics is you never run out of things to do.
Hugh, the focus of what's wrong with education today always seems to be on the schools or the teachers. What can we do to put focus on the parents' role in their child's education?
The book I mentioned earlier, Work Hard, Be Nice by Jay Matthews, puts a lot of focus on that, as do I think most serious education reformers. They realize that the classroom is a 24/7 thing for children, that they have parents who model reading, they will read. If they have parents who encourage other activities that are not sedentary or television, turn off the television, turn off the video games, it works. Very hard for the state, and I'm very suspicious of the state mandating how parents raise children. I do not want the state, dumping into a house and monitoring if you're being a good parent when it comes to education. But I do think that you can hold up good models of what has worked and what does work by telling the stories of the parents who do sacrifice extraordinarily, like waiting for Superman did. So I would be reluctant before anyone does it. I will say one thing, though. You could support the homeschooling movement a lot more than has been supported. Constantly under threat from the unions in states across it. Michael Smith is the president of the Homeschooling Association. I've had him on the show a few times. And so it's part of the Republican agenda. It ought to be part of any freedom agenda to make sure that if you choose to raise your children outside of the grip of public education, you ought to be allowed to do so without fear or favor.
Let me return to the question you asked me about what you do next. Probably what you do next is that in 10 years, there may not be schools. I mean, with the internet developing the way it is, and the potential for online education being as effective as it is. Now, remember when Rudy Giuliani took a call from his wife in the middle of a debate? I'm about to do that. Hi, I'm still speaking, I'll tell you.
It's really, actually, it's Tim Pawlenty.
Everybody, tell everybody how much you appreciate my wife for all the great books she writes. Hear that? Okay.
So much for my card on virtual education. But go ahead, Dick. Questions for you.
But I mean, the whole concept of a school building and a place you go for 6 hours a day really antedates the communications revolution. And I think that, and certainly at the college level, the other day, a year or two ago, I spoke at a graduation ceremony for a college whose name I forget, that educates servicemen and women around the world.
Ohio State.
No, it's a school dedicated to that. And their tuition is $4,500 a year, which is the amount the military allocates for that. And they have, and at this ceremony, like 1,000 people were getting BAs and maybe 100 masters and 4 or 5 PhDs. And this was the only time they had ever met one another or met any of their teachers. It was entirely online, like from Okinawa and Afghanistan and Iraq. And it was just incredible. And the level of educational attainment was superb. These people were really, so they had the same maturity and discipline of the services, and it led to great education. So I think the ultimate step after this really challenges the whole notion of a physical school.
I do love this one. We always get one of these. Either Dick or Hugh, will the House repeal cap and trade?
Yeah, well, the problem is that what Obama is doing now is it's Obama 2. Obama 1 was getting his legislative agenda passed, and he got most of it, but he failed on cap and trade. He failed on card check, which eliminates the secret ballot in union elections. And he failed on any effort to rein in talk radio or regulate the internet. What he is now doing is implementing this entire program by executive order. And his window dressing yesterday of repealing regulations was just designed to immunize him against the charge that I'm making now. But the EPA is about to implement cap and trade administratively. And it's the most outrageous thing you can imagine. They're doing it under the Clean Air Act. Now, the Clean Air Act, which Richard Nixon pushed through, has saved so many lives and so much health because of its cutback in particulate emissions and sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide, stuff that lead and stuff that really needed to be policed, and was very effective in doing it. And it's a big factor in the increases in life expectancy, almost as important as the decrease in smoking. But they're using this Clean Air Act as the statutory basis to regulate carbon dioxide. Now, there's nothing unhealthy about carbon dioxide. We're all breathing it right now. There is supposedly a connection with global warming. But what they're saying is that if your state and your community has an unhealthy concentration, an overconcentration of carbon dioxide, you can't have a new factory that emits carbon dioxide in your state and in your community. Why not? Because the Clean Air Act prohibits it. But the Clean Air Act was about disease-causing chemicals, and if it's at above a certain point in a given region, you don't want another factory spewing that stuff out, and it's more important to cut it back there than in a place which doesn't have it. But they're applying the same statutory rule. And by the way, in the last 12 months, the percentage of electricity generated through coal in the United States has dropped from 52 to 45 in 1 year, and the percent from natural gas has almost doubled in the last 5 years, and renewables have doubled. We're solving this problem anyway without federal regulation. So what the House has to do now is to amend the budget for the EPA and say no money in this budget shall be used to tax carbon dioxide, and amend the budget for the IRS and say no money in this budget shall be used to enforce the individual or employer mandate, and amend the budget for Health and Human Services and say no money shall be used for health care rationing or Medicare cuts. Amend the FCC budget and say no money shall be used for shortening the licensure period or changing the standards for talk radio, or for implementing net neutrality regulations. Now, Obama's going to veto that, and the House is going to insist on it. And that will be the whole issue of September, October, November, and it'll probably go into May or June. There may not be a budget. The House may opt not to shut down the government, but to shut down specific agencies. I could see the House saying, we will not appropriate any IRS budget until you defund the individual mandate, and let Obama stew on that one. Right now, Obama's moving to the center, but he's not. It's all show, it's all fluff. When you confront him with the hard issues like spending cuts in return for the debt limit expansion, state bankruptcy laws in return for helping the states solve their fiscal problems, and defunding Obamacare and cap and trade and the other stuff as we pass the budget, then you're not going to see him move to the center. He'll remain hard left. The election will be fought over those issues, and he's a one-term president.
Hugh, according to this questioner, in Utah, the voters failed to approve school choice. And so either one of you... Okay,
there was a referendum in Utah on school choice. And the people who were pushing it said, hey, this is the most conservative state in America, the most Republican state. Obviously, it's going to pass here. So they hired me to do a poll on it. And I said, you're going to get clobbered. And they said, why? And I said, because the voters know that the public schools are controlled by the Mormon Church. There are no public schools in Utah. They were all church schools. They happen to be funded by the taxpayers. And they lost.
I'll add to that. Another great political consultant, I said I know, is a fellow by the name of Ken Kachigian. And Ken was, in fact, the first one that I knew. He was, when I was working in San Clemente with President Nixon in 78, 79, and 80, Ken had just gone off staff. He has a role in Frost Nixon. And Ken is like Dick and like Lee Atwater and like Frank Luntz, one of those guys who just lives, breathes, eats, knows branding and how to sell. And he tried to pass a too-large school choice measure in California. What year was it, Kevin? 1994?
I don't remember.
96. There was an initiative, and they put a lot of money into it from Silicon Valley, but it was too broad. It was about all public schools instead of the failing public schools. And a lot of people who like their public schools said, nah, my kids are going to a good system. I'm not going to vote against it. So we too often assume facts not in evidence, which is there are some really great public schools. And as we go about choice, we can't threaten them. People will defend good public schools. We just have to give people choice to get out of the bad ones.
And to get into the good ones.
Right. And to get into them. Yeah.
Get into them. But for a long time, the school choice movement focused on referenda, and they never won any of them. Because there was a low turnout, the teachers union made all of their members and family and sisters and cousins and aunts vote for it. The teachers union had vastly more money than the education reform groups did. But now they're not pursuing that route. What we're doing is taking advantage of the necessity of the states for this kind of change, coupled with the responsiveness of the newly elected Republican governors. And by the way, when I say newly elected Republican governors, I am not altogether certain that Jerry Brown is not going to move in the direction of school choice, because he gets all of it, gets a lot of money from the unions and all of that. But Brown has always been an eccentric Democrat, and I wouldn't bet that. And he knows that he can't solve his budget problems without moving in that direction. So I wouldn't write him off.
Hugh, the question for you, I am an 8-year LAUSD dropout/recovery teacher. I opened my own private nonprofit school last year called Gateway Preparatory Academy. LAUSD is a sinking ship and those kids need help, but I cannot sustain the school without help. Any suggestions?
Well, I've got a friend who's running a Lutheran school down in Fallbrook. And the same thing is true, is that the overhead is so high and there's no endowment, and there's not. The only way to sustain a vital, growing private school movement is to allow these vouchers to come through either tax credit or through portability. In the short term, all you can do is pray and beg that someone shows up, but there's not like a magic fountain out there of money that shows up and gives you money. It just doesn't exist. It's too big of a problem. The public monopoly on funding is too intense.
Yeah, but again, stay tuned.
It's just, hang on, Calvary is coming.
By the way, Hugh, the same person who asked the question about his Gateway Preparatory School does say he has several superb cigars to share.
No, thank you very much.
In exchange,
then we'll find you money.
in exchange for your response. Another question, why would, and this question goes to, it's come up a couple of different times in a couple of different ways, so I'm just going to frame it in summary form for either one of you. How can we win the battle of rhetoric? Because obviously, the position that we communicate seems to be common sense, and we would be able to win the battle of rhetoric, but as you just pointed out, we're losing some of these initiatives. So suggestions on winning the battle of rhetoric.
Yeah, in the speeches and in the focus, the most effective argument for school choice is the idea that one size doesn't fit all, that kids are unique and are different, and they're entitled to have a range of options for the schools they go to. And that concept of fitting the needs of each individual student by finding a school that's a match for them is something that people readily and easily understand. But let's bear in mind, when we're dealing with politics, that there are 55 million school children in the United States, and they have about 80 million adults who live with them, maybe 90 million, about 1.6. That leaves about 150 million voters that have nothing to do with children or with schools. And for them, this is much more of a taxpayer issue than it is an education issue. And for them, the whole point is the huge, gigantic waste in schools as a result of the money that the teachers' union spends.
For me, the messaging took a big turn this week. I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry about that. It's the Santa Ana's. Detroit isn't different, it's just first. That is, to me, we now have the perfect poster child for everything that public education has become, and it's not different from LAUSD, it's not different from St. Louis, it's not different. Detroit isn't different, it's first.
Yeah. When I spoke to a group in Detroit 2 days ago, I said if I were giving the speech any place else, I would say, reform your schools or you'll be like Detroit.
You can use Los Angeles, unfortunately. I can ask this question. It came up in 3 or 4 different cards. I can really ask the question in one word. Pensions. Who wants to go first?
Well, there was a tremendous breakthrough in the legislation on pensions in Utah. You may have seen the Wall Street Journal editorial yesterday. The guy named Dan Lillenquist, a state legislator there, pioneered a reform in pensions that passed, that moves the pension system from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. Right now, if you tell an employee, a public employee, you are going to retire at half pay, and we guarantee that to you, that's fine if the market is soaring and interest rates are high and you can invest money in high-interest treasury bills or in mortgages and all of that. But when you're in a depressed environment like this, it means the state has to ante up an enormous amount of money. So what they're doing in Utah is every state worker will get 10% of his or her paycheck deposited every year into a IRA that they can carry with them to other jobs, to private sector jobs. There are limits on how they can be invested so that they don't, gamble it away and stuff. But they basically go from a defined benefit to a defined contribution, and I think that's going to be fundamental in the changes that will be necessary here. Rudy Giuliani the other day said, "We pay in New York City for 3 police departments. The current one, the last one, and the one before that, because we're paying out of city tax money each year. 1/10 of our budget goes to pay the health insurance for retired city employees."
And I'll just add, we did this. My last job in the Reagan administration was as Deputy Director and General Counsel of the Office of Personnel Management when we adopted the transition, when we went from a defined benefit program to a defined contribution program. And it worked seamlessly because all you have to do is start, and all of a sudden the actuarial tables become your friend. But the government financing that does not begin to reform itself is doomed, and so we have to do that. And I would think that the Public Employee Union, so it has not yet come forward with any evidence that they understand this, knows that they have to get on board, or everything that has been promised will, under this Chapter 9 amendment that Dick laid out, which is true, be gone. Because as everyone who's ever worked in a steel town or grew up in a steel town knows, all of those promises made by the American steel industry were not worth the paper they were written on when they went belly up. They got 30 cents on the dollar, 45 cents on the dollar, and it could be that bad of a haircut. They got to negotiate now.
It's funny that you mentioned steel town. I've spoken to the Detroit people about the difference between Pittsburgh and Detroit. In 1990, Pittsburgh had twice the unemployment rate of Detroit, and now they're reversed. And the reason is that in Pittsburgh, they told people steel isn't coming back. And they switched to a knowledge-based economy, Carnegie Mellon and all of that stuff. And in Detroit, the politicians sold them the soothing syrup that that car industry was coming back. And they're still doing it. And they never adopted serious changes. Their school system is horrible, and it's literally a dying city and potentially a dying state. Michigan has now entered the recession 2 years before the country did, and it has the second highest unemployment rate, the highest being Nevada.
Dick, something that you and I discussed, there's a card on the Ambassador Hotel High School here in Los Angeles. We discussed it briefly on my show. It's the high school that we spent $500 million on with talking benches and marble walls, and we can't afford to pay in the LAUSD the janitors. And the question is actually related to construction budgets versus curriculum budgets. The last question before we have your final statements tonight. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have to fold that into school choice. I think you need to, eventually, you need to take the capital money and fold it in with the operating money and go to the schools that parents want to send their children to. The whole idea here is to make schools earn their money and let parents be the arbiters of that. And I think that's essential. You know, we're talking about school choice here. We're going to go through a phase of school choice. Then we're going to go through a phase of the public schools getting markedly better to compete and win in a school choice environment. Because they'll be given the flexibility to win, and they'll go ahead and they'll use that. And if they're not given the flexibility, they'll fail, and the teachers will understand the need to give them that flexibility. So school choice is really ultimately a way to save the public school system, not a way to destroy it.
And Hugh and Dick, in the time that we had left, if you would just have a closing statement based on the issue and where you think we go next.
Sure, this is an appeal. You are not 500. You are 5,000 or even 50,000. Every single person in this room has an email contact list of at least 10, and many of you have more than 100, more than 200 or 250. Please write down this number, 69866, and not only text it yourself, but go home tonight and tomorrow and say, no, this really does matter. It's entertaining as hell to listen to Dick talk and give his stories, but you didn't come here because of that. You came here because schools are in trouble and they need to change. The way to do that, the only way to do that, is to mobilize grassroots activism of the sort that Dick is talking about. So will you not only please text that number and get smart and sustain smart on school choice, but enlist 10 or 15 or 100 people in doing the same thing, because when the solutions are put before people, they adopt them.
I think that, first of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in this. Look, the flip side of the scenario I paint here is that if having elected 11 Republican governors, having elected 19 new Republican state legislative chambers, facing the fiscal crisis that we face at the state level, controlling the House of Representatives in this current fiscal environment, cutting off the subsidy to the states, the additional subsidy, so they have to reform themselves, we don't win, we're never going to win. You know, I mean, if we don't win now, we're never going to win. So it is absolutely crucial that we mobilize and work at that. That's why Hugh and I are going around the country doing it. I've spoken in 3 cities, and I've got 6 more to go. This is, not my usual line of work, but it's absolutely crucial. This is the time where it will either work or not, and it depends on how effectively we mobilize our grassroots.
Let me also add, please, just a quick thank you to special guest star Jim Rogan, to Don Wagner, and to Kevin James, who you can hear every night on KRLA 870. Thank you, guys.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance tonight. Always keep our station on your dial, 870 KRLA, and a thank you to 2 of the most respected thinkers and commentators in America today, Hugh Hewitt and Dick Morris.
Pleasure working with you.